1931. The Soviet Union tests a steel tube called the RS-65. It is the grandfather of a legend. This weapon kills the most advanced tanks of the 21st century for 60 years straight. No other infantry weapon has this record. Think about it. 60 years is the service life of a massive battleship, not a handheld pipe. This technology from the era of biplanes still dictates the rules of modern war. It makes generals wonder if the heavy tank has any future at all. The story starts with the experimental RPG-7. It was a shoulder-launched prototype designed to stop armor, but the early version lacked a shaped charge warhead. The first tests ended in a technical failure. While Moscow shelved its experiments, German engineers were looking for a way to survive. The red tide of Soviet armor was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a mechanical wall moving toward Berlin. The infantry felt a new kind of sickness: tank terror. Imagine standing in a shallow trench. 30 tons of steel are screaming toward you. Your hands shake. The iron sights dance. You have one shot, and you have to wait until the beast is 30 meters away. At that distance, you can smell the exhaust. You can see the rivets on the turret. The Americans had the bazooka. The Germans took it and made it lethal. They built the Panzerschreck. The name literally translates to tank terror. It was a heavy tube that fired a massive rocket. It could punch through 200 millimeters of armor. That was enough to turn any Allied tank into a pressurized oven. But the Panzerschreck was complex. It needed a two-man crew and weeks of training. Germany didn't have weeks. They needed a weapon for the old men and the children of the Hitler Youth. The solution was the Panzerfaust, the armor fist. A crude, disposable steel pipe with a shaped charge on the end. No reloading, no recoil, just a trigger and a prayer. It was cheap enough to build by the millions. It was simple enough for a schoolboy to fire. By 1945, the Panzerfaust was the only thing standing between the Red Army and the Chancellery. Engineers even drafted the Panzerfaust 250. It was designed to be reloaded. It was designed to change the war. But the factories were already rubble. The Germans ran out of time. The Soviets began their analysis of the captured tubes. Blueprints that never reached the front lines in Berlin soon lay on desks in Moscow. Soviet engineers ignored the chaos of the war's end. They began a cold, methodical synthesis of captured technology. During the conflict, the Red Army relied on heavy anti-tank rifles and towed cannons. Now they needed something a man could carry. They didn't just copy the Panzerfaust or the bazooka. They took the best ideas from both and began a systematic work on mistakes. The result was the RPG-7. The engineers disassembled the German tubes. They drew new schemes. They discarded the fragile German firing mechanisms. The new weapon featured a 1-meter launch tube. It had an angled pistol grip and a wooden heat shield to protect the shooter's face. The design was right. The physics were not. During tests, the RPG-7 failed. A dull thud echoed as the dud round hit the dirt. The range was too short. The accuracy was non-existent. The military scrapped it. They started over from scratch. The solution was the RPG-2. It featured a larger propellant charge and a massive 80mm heat round. 225 millimeters of steel. That was the penetration power. It was a guaranteed death sentence for any tank of that era. The weapon reached a range of 200 meters. In 1954, the Soviet and Chinese commands officially adopted the system and began shipping the first crates to the troops. Aluminum armor burned like paper. In the jungles of Vietnam, the theory of 1954 became a lethal reality for American crews. They called the M113 an armored personnel carrier. To the men inside, it was a coffin made of light alloy. Imagine the interior of an M113. It is cramped and humid. Suddenly, a white-hot jet of copper pierces the side. There is no explosion at first, only a blinding flash and the scream of metal. The aluminum doesn't just bend, it shatters. Jagged shards spray the cabin, turning the interior into a whirlwind of razor-sharp fragments. Did the armor save them? The M113 was a sieve. Its protection was 5 times thinner than the penetrating power of the enemy's warhead. 225 millimeters of steel penetration meant the aluminum skin might as well have been plywood. The projectiles punched through one side and exited the other. The terror spread to the heavy units. The M48 and M60 Patton tanks, the pride of the U.S. inventory, were no longer safe. Even helicopters weren't immune. In 1961, the Soviet Army officially filled its ranks with the ultimate evolution of this threat. Western intelligence labeled it the rocket-propelled grenade. They called it the RPG. But the Soviet engineers had a different name. In Russian, the letters stand for Ruchnoy Protivotankovy Granatomoyet, handheld anti-tank grenade launcher. American soldiers in the jungles of Vietnam weren't looking for a miracle. They were looking for the source of a nightmare. They found it in a piece of steel pipe. Simple, crude, lethal. The RPG-7 is not a high-tech marvel. It is a chrome-lined steel tube, 3 millimeters thick. It does not rust. It does not require a cleaning kit. It just fires. The design is a paradox. The tube diameter is exactly 40 millimeters, but the grenade does not fit inside. It sticks out of the muzzle like a massive iron hammer. This allows a compact launcher to fire warheads of almost any size. Engineering through subtraction. Two handles sit beneath the steel. The forward grip holds the trigger and the safety. Above them sits a battery-powered sight. The glass is graduated to 1,000 meters. Is it accurate at that distance? No. At a kilometer, you might hit a warehouse. To kill a tank, you must be closer. 300 meters is the limit of luck. For everything else, there are flip-up iron sights. They never run out of batteries. The real danger sits at the back. A steel cone deflects the blast. When the trigger pulls, the tube becomes an open combustion chamber. You need 2 meters of empty space behind you, minimum. Imagine a concrete room. You aim at a patrol. You forget the wall behind your back. The pressure hits the stone and bounces. It does not just deafen, it crushes lungs. Black soot coats the walls where a soldier once stood. The weapon requires a team of 2. The shooter aims, the assistant carries the weight. The loader slides the rocket into the muzzle and twists it into the notch. The safety of the launch tube was a lie. Real death waited inside the copper cone of the grenade. It is called the Monroe effect. Inside the warhead, there is only a hollow cavity and a thin lining of soft copper. It looks empty. It looks harmless. But when the fuse hits armor, this emptiness burns through a quarter meter of solid steel. The explosive charge detonates. The copper cone collapses into a needle-long spike. It does not melt. It flows like a liquid at hypersonic speeds. The jet screams at 10 kilometers per second. That is 12 times faster than a bullet from a Kalashnikov. Picture the crew inside. One moment, they are encased in 26 tons of rolled homogeneous armor. The next, a supersonic whistle of white-hot metal pierces the hull. The jet enters the cabin. It carries a cloud of molten droplets and shattered steel fragments. The temperature spikes to thousands of degrees. Everything flammable ignites instantly. Fuel lines rupture. Ammunition racks cook off. In 1961, this 3-millimeter layer of copper was enough to turn any tank in the world into a pressurized furnace. But the RPG evolved. If the tank survived the metal jet, it wouldn't survive the vacuum. Newer thermobaric rounds turn the battlefield into a laboratory of pressure. First, a small charge sprays a fuel aerosol into the air. A millisecond later, the main explosion ignites the cloud. The blast wave does not just hit you, it consumes every molecule of oxygen in the room. In enclosed spaces, the overpressure crushes lungs and collapses internal organs. The heat follows. Even if the shock wave misses, the environment itself becomes the killer. A 10-meter radius of absolute thermal hell. The lungs stop, the heart fails. Silence from the pressure drop. To trigger this mechanical hell, the operator had to remember one tiny plastic detail. Why did dozens of grenades bounce off American tanks without exploding? The safety cap. Poorly trained insurgents often forgot to strip the plastic from the piezoelectric fuse. They pulled the trigger, the rocket flew, and the warhead hit the steel with a harmless thud. A $1 million machine saved by a piece of cheap polyethylene. The sequence begins with the fingers. The pin is pulled. The cap is discarded. Pressure on the trigger ignites the booster cartridge. It punches the grenade 11 meters out of the tube, clear of the shooter's face. Then, the main rocket motor screams to life. If the trigger is pulled, the target has almost no time to pray. The round accelerates to 300 meters per second. That is less than 1 second of reaction time at average combat distances. But the weapon is temperamental. Bad storage in jungle caches or desert holes turns the grenade into a pipe bomb. The fuse can fail, or it can trigger too early. Sometimes the warhead detonates inches from the operator's eyes. If the projectile misses, it won't fly forever. A self-destruct mechanism triggers automatically at 900 meters. It ensures the live explosive doesn't become a permanent landmine for civilians. The flight is stabilized by physics. 4 steel fins snap open the moment the round clears the muzzle. Soviet engineers designed the projectile for a 300-meter sprint. They didn't realize their creation would eventually circle the globe. 1961. The Soviet Union officially adopts the RPG-7. It was supposed to stay within the Eastern Bloc. It didn't. 9 million launchers. Think about that number. At the time of its peak production, that was 1 unit for every 800 people on the planet. The Kremlin didn't just build a weapon, they flooded the world with it. The real baptism took place in the jungles of North Vietnam. It was the perfect stage for a cheap, crude pipe. Small teams vanished into the thick vegetation. They waited. They fired at point-blank range. American steel stood no chance. The RPG-7 shredded patrol boats and brought down helicopters. It punched through the heavy armor of M48 Patton tanks. Multi-million-dollar machines turned into scrap metal by a weapon that cost less than a soldier's boots. From the jungles, the trail led to the black markets. It followed the same path as the AK-47. The RPG became the primary tool for every insurgent, every militia, and every questionable organization on the map. It was no longer a Soviet asset. It was a global plague. The impact was immediate and desperate. Tank crews began welding improvised cage armor and scrap metal onto their hulls. The initial shock forced a change in tactics. Steel hulls were no longer enough. Tankers looked for anything to put between themselves and the incoming copper jet. Wooden boards, rubber mats, even layers of cardboard. These were the first improvised defenses. The logic was simple. Make the grenade detonate early. Space was the only shield. A few inches of air could bleed the energy from a shaped charge before it touched the main armor. But the real answer arrived in the 1970s. It was called Explosive Reactive Armor, ERA. Was it a high-tech shield? Not exactly. Imagine rows of metal bricks bolted to the hull. Each brick is a sandwich of explosives between 2 steel plates. When the RPG hits, the brick explodes outward. It physically shatters the molten jet. It turns a lethal strike into a loud dent. By the 1980s, these explosive jackets became the global standard. Engineers added heavy applique plates and steel cages, slat armor. It looked like a bird cage, but it worked. The bars would crush the grenade's nose cone, shorting out the fuse before it could fire. The defense held. For a while. Then the hunters adapted. Insurgents stopped firing single shots. They organized RPG teams to swarm a single target. They aimed for the roof, the rear, and the thin metal between the wheels. One hit would strip the ERA bricks. The second would find the bare steel. The third would kill the crew. They didn't always need a fireball. A jammed turret or a snapped track was a victory. An immobilized tank is just a stationary coffin waiting for the final blow. The hunters needed more power, and they found it in the tandem charge warhead. The armor race hit a wall. Reactive tiles stopped single jets, so the hunters changed the math. They didn't need more explosives, they needed 2 steps. The tandem charge warhead was born. The first small charge hits the explosive tile. It triggers the counterblast, clearing the way. A microsecond later, the main jet strikes the now naked hull. It is a 1-2 punch designed to skin a tank alive. How deep can a shaped charge go? Newer systems like the RPG-29, the Vampire, boast warheads that burn through 600 millimeters of steel. This isn't just a weapon, it is a surgical tool for heavy armor. But you don't always need the latest tech. The old RPG-7 remains the king of the street. It is cheap. It is everywhere. In Iraq, one M1 Abrams took 14 hits from RPG-7 rounds. The main armor held. There was no catastrophic fireball, but the tank was dead. Sensors were smashed. The engine was a wreck. Total mission kill by a weapon from the 1960s. Urban centers are where tanks go to die. Imagine a T-72 rolling into Grozny in 1994. The streets are narrow, the buildings are tall. Every window is a potential launch site. Chechen teams didn't fire from the front. They fired from the third floor. They fired from the basement. They aimed for the thin roof and the engine deck. In the first few days, the Russian army lost over 100 tanks and infantry vehicles. Metal stayed on the streets. The crews stayed inside. Engineers scrambled for a solution to stop the bleeding. They built the most advanced protection systems in history. Yet, 60 years later, a piece of pipe and a rocket still dictate the terms of engagement. The hunt for a perfect shield led to the birth of active protection systems. Steel meets silicon. To stop a rocket designed 60 years ago, the modern tank needs more than iron. It needs a brain. Active Protection Systems, APS, became the ultimate hope. One cheap projectile versus one multi-million-dollar machine. The industry split the solution into two paths, soft kill and hard kill. Soft kill is a ghost in the machine. It jams seekers. It blinds laser guidance. It makes the tank invisible to high-tech missiles. But the RPG-7 is a relic. It has no electronics to fry, no seeker to confuse. It is a hollow charge on a stick, aimed by an eye and a steady hand. Soft kill is useless here. How do you stop an unguided flying pipe? You shoot it down. Hard kill systems like the Israeli Trophy or Iron Fist use radar to watch the horizon. When a rocket enters the kill zone, the system fires. A counter-projectile strikes the RPG mid-air. It shreds the warhead before it touches the hull. The problem seems solved, but technology has a price. Sensors fail in the mud and smoke of real combat. Then there is the human cost. An APS blast doesn't just kill the rocket, it sprays lethal shrapnel in every direction. If infantry is nearby, the system is a threat to its own side. Do commanders keep the shield active in the chaos of a city? Often, they don't. Hatches stay open for visibility. Systems are switched off to save friendly soldiers from friendly fire. In the ruins of Gaza, the Merkava Mark IV is the peak of evolution. Yet RPG-7s still find their mark at point-blank range. A trophy system carries a limited number of interceptors, 5 rockets, 10 rockets. Eventually, the magazine runs dry. A coordinated volley from 3 directions simply overwhelms the computer. The shield breaks. The Israeli Ministry of Defense confirmed that during the first weeks of the conflict, several tanks were hit because the systems were overwhelmed by simultaneous launches. One pipe costs $300. One interceptor costs $30,000. The math of war favors the cheap. High-end interceptors fail when the math shifts. One rocket is cheap. 10 rockets are a saturation point. Active protection systems have a limit. They click, rotate, and fire until the magazine runs dry. Then comes the silence of an empty launcher. The RPG-7 didn't die with the arrival of smart armor. It evolved. Someone took the classic PG-7V warhead and strapped it to a plastic quadcopter with zip ties. A 60-year-old weapon found a digital nervous system. How do you stop a ghost you can't jam? Fiber optic cables now trail behind these drones. Thousands of meters of glass thread unspooling in the air. Radio jammers are useless. The pilot sees a crystal clear picture until the very last millisecond. The physics remains lethal. A shaped charge doesn't care about the drone's speed. It doesn't need a heavy barrel or a supersonic kinetic dart. It only needs to touch the steel. At that moment, a jet of molten copper burns through 300 millimeters of armor. Look at the turret. Crews are desperate. They weld steel cages, stack sandbags, and bolt corrugated iron sheets over million-dollar optics. They call them turtle tanks. Massive, improvised metal shells designed to keep the drone at a distance. The tank becomes a blind, heavy box. It looks like a relic from a different century. Yet the drones keep coming. They find the gap in the mesh. They dive into the open hatch. A weapon designed in 1961 is winning the war of the 21st century. The most advanced armor on Earth is being dismantled by a piece of plumbing and a battery. One drone costs $500. One tank costs $6 million. The math of war has finally collapsed.